It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished up school for the week. I was excited because my parents promised we would have dinner at one of my favorite places, KFC. I was around 8 years old, living in a small town near the coast. My dad usually went to pick up the food, but this time he said, "Why don't you come with me? We'll make it a little adventure." I agreed, thrilled that I would get to tag along. As we drove through the winding streets toward the restaurant, the night air felt cool against the window and the sky was already turning dark. I remember feeling so grown up, sitting next to my dad in the front seat. He asked me what I wanted from the menu, and I proudly said, "A bucket of crispy chicken with mashed potatoes and biscuits." I was already thinking about how I was going to devour the food when we got home. When we arrived at the restaurant, the place was almost empty, except for a few other people sitting in the corner. My dad and I went inside, and I remember the smell of fried chicken filling the air. It was familiar and comforting, something I looked forward to every time we came here. My dad went up to the counter to place our order, and I wandered off to look at the windows near the back of the room, gazing outside at the darkening streets. But then, something strange happened. I was standing by the window, minding my own business, when I heard the door open behind me. I turned around and saw a man walk in. He looked around quickly, scanning the room before his eyes landed on my dad. The man approached him, and they started talking. I didn't pay much attention to their conversation. I was too busy staring out the window, lost in my own thoughts. Then, without any warning, the door behind me opened again. A woman stepped inside. She had long, dark hair and a smile that seemed a bit too wide. She glanced around and then locked eyes with me. Without saying anything, she walked over to me and held out her hand. "Hi there," she said sweetly. "What's your name?" I didn't know what to do. I hesitated for a second, but then shook her hand. Her grip was firm, almost too firm. "I'm Jake," I said, trying to sound friendly, though I felt a little uneasy. But before I could pull my hand away, she grabbed my wrist and started walking backward, dragging me toward the door. "Come on, I want to show you something," she said in a soft, almost coaxing voice. I was confused, but my legs moved automatically, as though they had a mind of their own. I tried to pull back, but her grip tightened. As we reached the door, I saw the man who had been talking to my dad sprinting toward us. He must have noticed something wasn't right. "Let go of him," I heard my dad shout from the front of the restaurant. But it was too late. The woman didn't stop. She tugged me outside and I followed, still unsure of what was happening. Outside, I saw an old van parked on the side of the building. It looked worn out and dirty, the kind of vehicle you would see in a neighborhood where people kept to themselves. The door of the van was already open. Without a word, she pushed me toward the van. "Just come inside for a second, it'll be quick," she said in a voice that felt too smooth. I didn't want to go inside. I wanted to run back to my dad, but she was too strong. Before I knew it, I was lifted into the van almost like I was weightless, and then the door slammed shut behind me. My heart started racing. I looked around the van, trying to make sense of what was going on. The woman was sitting beside me, still holding my wrist. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Was this some kind of trick? Was she trying to kidnap me? And then, just as the panic started to settle in, I saw my dad running toward us. "Get away from him!" he screamed, his voice full of desperation. Just as quickly as the woman had grabbed me, she let go. The door of the van flew open and I was shoved out. I hit the ground hard but didn't care. My dad was standing right in front of me, holding out his hand. "Get up, Jake. Let's go now," he yelled. I scrambled to my feet and we ran back toward the restaurant. I could hear the woman's voice yelling at the man in the driver's seat, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from them. My dad pulled me inside the restaurant, and we were safe. But then something strange happened. As we stood there, catching our breath, I noticed the van pulling away quickly. My dad pointed out that it didn't have any license plates on it. That struck me as odd. Why would a van be driving around without plates? I had no idea what had just happened, but I was scared. I never wanted to go back to that place again. My dad immediately called the police. The officers arrived within minutes and I was taken aside to explain what happened. I told them everything, about the woman, the van, and how she grabbed me. They listened carefully and asked me to describe the people I saw. The officers looked concerned but assured me they would look into it. The restaurant staff, though not at fault, were shaken up by the whole incident. My dad was furious, but he was more worried about me. After talking with the police, we left the restaurant and went straight home. I didn't say much during the drive. I just wanted to forget about the whole thing. After that night, we never returned to that KFC again. I couldn't shake the feeling of those cold hands around my wrist or the way the woman's smile seemed fake. It haunted me for weeks. Years passed and I forgot about that night, or at least I thought I did. One evening I found myself driving through the same area as an adult. I was hungry and noticed the KFC up ahead. I hadn't been there since that night, but I thought maybe it was time to face the past. So I drove in. When I got to the drive-thru, I noticed something strange. The speaker was silent, even though the lights were on. I waited for a minute, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. A truck pulled up behind me, its headlights blinding me, and the driver began honking. I rolled my window down to see what was going on, and before I knew it, the driver was out of his truck shouting at me. I was confused and scared. The man seemed out of his mind, like he was on something. He yelled at me for holding up the line even though the restaurant was clearly closed. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, he got back into his truck and started following me as I drove away. He was dangerously close, revving his engine. I did my best to stay calm, but then he veered his truck toward me, trying to run me off the road. I slammed on my brakes and his truck swerved, crashing into a ditch. I stopped, watching him get out and begin running toward me. That was when I sped away, calling the police to report the incident. After everything settled, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to that night all those years ago. Was it all just coincidence? Or was there something darker at play? I may never know, but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night and the strange feeling that somehow it wasn't over. It's been years, but I can't shake the feeling that someone or something is still watching. I was on the road, driving across the state to visit my parents. It had been over a year since I'd seen them, and I was excited to finally make the trip. My car hummed along the empty highway, the sun high in the sky, and my mind was on nothing but getting to their house quickly. I had promised my girlfriend I wouldn't eat in the car, so I wasn't planning to stop for anything except gas. Around 2 in the afternoon, though, my stomach started growling. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I pulled into a small KFC off the side of the road. The place looked like it had seen better days, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. I figured it would be a quick stop, just long enough to grab something to eat and get back on the road. As I walked in, the only person in the restaurant was an older woman behind the counter. She gave me a warm, tired smile, like I was the first customer she'd had in hours. I smiled back and ordered a soda and some chicken nuggets. "Back in a sec," she said, and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat down at a booth, glancing out the window at the rain clouds rolling in. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but when I looked up, something caught my attention. A car had pulled into the lot, but it wasn't just any car, it was a black limo. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a woman in a wedding dress step out of the driver's seat and walk into the restaurant. I couldn't help but stare. It wasn't every day you saw a limo, let alone a bride, at a KFC in the middle of nowhere. She must have noticed me staring because she looked right at me, smiled, and walked over. "Can I join you?" she asked. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Sure," I said, feeling awkward but not wanting to turn her down. I wasn't sure what to make of the whole situation. She sat down across from me, the wedding dress shimmering in the dim light of the KFC. I tried not to stare, but it was hard to ignore her. Her makeup was smeared, and there were traces of mascara under her eyes. She looked beautiful, even though her appearance seemed a little off. Her face was pale and her expression was tired, almost empty. "What's your name?" she asked, breaking the silence. Tom, I said. And you are? Mandy, she replied, offering a small smile. There was something off about her smile, something forced. I could tell she had been through something rough, but I didn't know how to ask. So, what brings you here? I asked, trying to make conversation. Mandy hesitated, and then her voice dropped low, almost like she didn't want to say it out loud. I just got left at the altar. My heart sank. Poor woman. I couldn't imagine how devastating that must feel. I'm really sorry to hear that, I said, not sure how else to respond. She didn't seem to hear me. She just stared at the table, her fingers trembling as they lightly tapped the surface. I thought I was special to him, but he lied. I didn't know what to say to that. I just sat there trying to think of something comforting, but before I could speak, she looked up at me and asked, "Am I hideous?" I was caught off guard. What? No, of course not, I said quickly. I was just about to say more when she interrupted. James said I was attractive, she continued, her voice shaking. But that was a lie. I didn't know who James was, but it was clear she was in pain. She needed someone to listen, and I didn't know what to do except try my best to comfort her. You're not hideous at all, I said again. You look great. She studied me, and for a second, I thought maybe she was going to cry. But then her expression softened, and she smiled again, a little more genuinely this time. Thanks, she whispered. You're very kind, Tom. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I wasn't sure how to keep the conversation going. Then she reached across the table and grabbed my hand, holding it tightly. I froze, my heart racing. Something about her touch felt off. The strange part was that she didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. Run away with me, Tom, she said softly. Just you and me. We can leave everything behind and start over. I stared at her, confused. Was she serious? Or was this just a moment of weakness after everything she'd been through? I didn't know how to respond, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I gently pulled my hand away from hers, trying to stay calm. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, backing away. I really need to go. She didn't let go of my hand immediately. For a moment she held on, her grip surprisingly strong. I started to panic a little, but before I could pull away entirely, I heard a voice from the back of the restaurant. Don't you look pretty, Mandy? I turned around and saw the old lady from the counter emerging from the kitchen, placing a tray of chicken nuggets in front of me. She looked at Mandy with a smile that was kind, but something about it felt wrong. Mandy stood up abruptly, pulling me with her. I'm going with him, she said, glaring at the old lady. I tried to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. I'm just gonna go get in my car, I said quickly, desperate to escape. Mandy's eyes locked onto mine, and she spoke with an edge in her voice. Don't leave me. Please, Tom. I tried to act casual as I walked toward the door, my mind racing. What was going on? Who was this woman? Why was she acting so strange? Mandy followed me, her footsteps light but persistent. As we passed the limo, I noticed something strange. The front fender of the car was caved in and there was a dark, sticky substance smeared across the bumper. I tried to look away, but it was too late. Mandy saw where my eyes were going and a strange smile crossed her face. That's what's left of our best man, she said quietly. I caught him with James behind the church. Her voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. He deserved it. I felt my stomach turn. I didn't know what to say. Was she talking about a real murder? It couldn't be, could it? She stopped walking and turned to face me, her eyes wide with a manic intensity. Do you think he deserved it, Tom? I nodded, not sure what else to say. I was terrified now. Yeah, I guess he did. She smiled again, but it wasn't the comforting smile I'd seen before. It was something darker. James is in the back, she said, her voice low. Would you like to see him? I stepped back instinctively. This woman was dangerous. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I had to get out of there before things got worse. I pulled away from Mandy, trying to remain calm, and quickly reached for the door handle of my car. I had to lock the door and drive off now. But as I tried to close the door, Mandy grabbed it, holding it open. Her grip was like iron, and I felt trapped. "No, Tom," she said, her voice a whisper. "I'm not done with you yet. I can't let you go." Before I could react, she spun around, her arms looping around mine like a vice. I tried to break free, but her strength was unnerving. "We're going to be together forever," she whispered. "You and me." I looked around desperately, trying to find a way out, but I couldn't. Then, just as I thought things couldn't get worse, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The limo was parked with its doors wide open, the interior of the car dark and silent. Suddenly, Mandy's grip tightened on me, and I felt her breath on my neck. "Do you want to see James?" she asked, her voice full of sickening sweetness. Before I could answer, a loud bang echoed through the air. The shot was so sudden and unexpected that I froze in place, my heart racing. Mandy's body jerked, and for a moment, she seemed to freeze. Then, with a sickening thud, she crumpled to the ground, blood soaking into her white wedding dress. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It took me a few seconds to comprehend what had just happened, but then I turned and saw the old woman from inside the KFC, standing with a shotgun in her hands. The old woman's voice was calm as she lowered the gun. "Get back inside, hun," she said, her Midwestern accent still as sweet as ever. "We need to call the police, and you didn't even get to eat your chicken nuggets." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, staring at the scene before me. What had just happened? How had it all gone so wrong so quickly? The police arrived soon after. They questioned me and the old woman, but there was little I could tell them. I didn't know who she was, and I didn't know why she had killed Mandy. But I was grateful, more than I could express. The old woman never gave her name, and I never saw her again after that night. As for Mandy, well, the police told me she was a fugitive. Her past was as dark as her final moments. I left that KFC as fast as I could. It was a night I'd never forget, and I'd never look at a random roadside fast food restaurant the same way again. Last summer, my boyfriend Alex and I decided to take a road trip. It was supposed to be a fun getaway, a way for us to break free from the grind of everyday life and just relax. But honestly, I wasn't that excited. We'd been arguing a lot lately, and I wasn't sure if spending days in a car together would solve anything. But Alex was insistent. "It'll be good for us," he kept saying. "We'll have a chance to talk, really talk." So, I went along with it, hoping maybe the fresh air and open road would help us reconnect. The trip started off fine. We drove for hours through the flat, open roads of the Midwest, with the sun setting behind us, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The weather was perfect, but the car wasn't. The AC was barely working, and the radio was either filled with static or blasting country songs that neither of us liked. It wasn't exactly the romantic, relaxing experience I'd hoped for. "Hey, can we talk about something?" I asked after we'd been driving in silence for a while. I wanted to make the most of this trip, so I tried to bring up lighter topics. "Sure, what's up?" Alex replied, glancing at me before turning his attention back to the road. "Movies, music, what our families have been up to, you know. Just something to pass the time," I said, trying to sound casual. But it didn't work. Every time I tried to start a conversation, it felt like there was this invisible wall between us. Alex would give short answers, and then we'd fall back into silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was bothering him, but he wouldn't tell me. I kept pushing, trying to get him to open up, but the harder I tried, the more distant he became. We were about 4 hours into the trip when we decided to stop at a KFC in a small town. I wasn't even hungry for fried chicken, but it was the only restaurant for miles. The place looked deserted when we pulled into the parking lot, which made me feel uneasy. There was only one car there, and it belonged to us. The restaurant itself was quiet. No other customers in sight, which struck me as odd for a fast food chain. Inside, the woman behind the counter greeted us with a surprised look, like she hadn't expected anyone to stop by. She didn't say much, just took our order in a mechanical tone and handed us our drinks. Alex grabbed a Diet Coke and I took a lemonade like I always do. We sat at one of the booths, the silence between us now thicker than ever. I could tell Alex was deep in thought, his eyes staring off into the distance. It was obvious that something was wrong. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Alex, are you happy?" I asked, breaking the silence. He flinched, and for a second, I regretted asking, but I had to know. "What do you mean?" he replied, his voice sounding defensive. I can tell something's bothering you. What's going on?" I pressed. He didn't answer right away, and I could see him struggling. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I've been having these nightmares," he whispered, looking down at his hands. "I can't get rid of them. They're so real, so vivid." I was stunned. Alex had always seemed like a calm, collected guy. I had never known him to be the type to have nightmares. "What kind of nightmares?" I asked, my voice soft. Alex took a deep breath and stared at the table. "It's like people are after me. They want to hurt me. And their eyes, they turn black. They go crazy." His voice trembled. I was quiet for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. It sounded bizarre, like something from a horror movie. But Alex was serious. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Months," he whispered. Just then, I noticed something strange. The woman who had taken our order earlier was standing near our table. She was watching us with an intense gaze, and for some reason it made me uncomfortable. I squeezed Alex's hand, trying to calm him, but he pulled away and suddenly jumped to his feet. He was staring at the woman, his face pale with fear. No, it's her," he shouted, his voice shaking. I stood up, confused. "Alex, calm down, what's wrong?" But he wasn't listening. His eyes were wide with terror, and he bolted out of the restaurant without saying another word. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. The woman behind the counter didn't seem surprised, but she did give me an odd look, as if she knew something I didn't. I ran outside, calling Alex's name, but he was nowhere to be found. The hot desert air hit me like a wall as I rushed across the parking lot, my heart racing. I ran into the empty field behind the KFC, calling his name, hoping he was just hiding somewhere, playing a prank. But the field stretched on for miles, flat and featureless, with no sign of him. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking as I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. Panic set in as I realized that Alex had disappeared, and I was all alone in this strange place. The KFC lady was still standing in the parking lot when I returned, looking more confused than ever. I explained that Alex had run off, but she didn't seem too concerned. "He'll come back," she said with an odd smile. "There's nowhere for him to go." I didn't feel comforted by her words. I called the police, but they didn't arrive for what felt like forever. By the time they showed up, I was starting to lose hope. They assured me they'd search for Alex, but there was no sign of him and the sun was starting to set. The police suggested I check into a nearby motel and wait for them to find Alex. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and I didn't know what else to do. I drove to the motel, which was about 50 miles away, my mind swirling with questions. Where had Alex gone? Why had he run off like that? I checked in, my hand still shaking, and spent the night alone waiting for any news. But the hours dragged on, and I heard nothing. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that woman from the KFC, her eyes turning black, just like Alex had said. It felt like something was closing in on me, something I couldn't escape. The next morning I decided to drive back to the KFC. Maybe someone had seen Alex, or maybe there was some clue I had missed. When I arrived, the restaurant was empty again, just like before. The woman was behind the counter, but this time she didn't greet me. She just stared at me with a look of recognition. "Have you seen my boyfriend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just smiled and shook her head. "No," she said, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. Then, something strange happened. As I was about to leave, I could have sworn her eyes turned completely black, just like Alex had described. I blinked, and they were back to normal, but I wasn't sure if I had imagined it or if it was real. I quickly left, my heart pounding. The whole place felt wrong. That night, I had a nightmare. I was back at the KFC and the woman was there again. Her eyes were black and she was chasing me, slowly but steadily, until I was trapped. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening, and I had to find Alex before it was too late. I called the police again, but they had no new information. It had been 3 days since Alex disappeared, and the search had turned up nothing. I couldn't help but feel that the woman at the KFC knew more than she was letting on, but I had no proof. I knew I had to go back to the KFC one more time. Something was pulling me there, and I couldn't ignore it. I arrived late at night. The place was dark and empty, but as I walked inside, I saw her. The woman was standing by the counter, staring at me with those cold black eyes. "You've come back," she said, her voice low and haunting. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Where is he?" I demanded. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing a dark figure lying on the floor behind the counter. It was Alex. He was pale, his eyes wide open, but there was no life in them. My heart sank as I realized the truth. The woman wasn't just some strange person. She was something far worse. And whatever had happened to Alex, it wasn't over yet. I ran out of the KFC, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget that night and the truth I had uncovered. Some things are better left unknown. It all started in the small town of Maple Springs. My name is Jack, and I had just turned 30 when I made one of the biggest decisions of my life, opening a fast food restaurant. It wasn't exactly my dream, but it felt like a solid choice for my family. I was married to Sarah, and we had 2 kids, Ethan and Lily. They were the reason I worked long hours, scrimped, and saved every penny I could to make this dream come true. The town didn't have a KFC, and I thought it could be the answer to everything: stability, success, and a better future. The opening day was a whirlwind. People lined up out the door, excited for the Colonel's famous chicken. The smell filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile as the cash registers rang, signaling that my hard work was finally paying off. It felt like a dream come true. As I ran back and forth, serving customers, cleaning, and making sure everything ran smoothly, I lost track of time. The buzz in the air made me feel alive, like I was exactly where I needed to be. But even with all the success, there was something nagging at me, something that I couldn't shake. A few weeks into the routine, something odd started to happen. Every evening after the last customer had left, I'd go through the motions of closing up shop. But one night, as I was locking the back door, I noticed a figure standing across the street. At first, it didn't seem like much, just a man standing under the dim street light staring at the restaurant. I thought he might have been a homeless guy, but something about him felt off. The next evening, as I was closing, I saw him again. This time, he was standing a little closer, right at the edge of the parking lot, watching me. His face was hidden in shadows, but I could make out his scruffy hair and the wild, intense look in his eyes. He wasn't moving, just standing there. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. I was just being paranoid, right? Sarah laughed it off when I mentioned it to her. "He probably just wants some food, Jack. You're overthinking things," she said, trying to calm my nerves. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Days turned into weeks, and the man seemed to become a regular sight in the parking lot, always standing there, staring. I was starting to feel uncomfortable, like I was being watched. One evening, as I was leaving the restaurant, I heard something behind me. A rustling sound like footsteps. My heart skipped a beat as I turned around. There he was, right behind me. I froze. He was grinning, this wide, unsettling grin, and holding something in his hand. The words he spoke made my blood run cold. I only need the bones. I didn't wait around to figure out what he meant. I bolted to my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. The man didn't follow me, but his words echoed in my head as I drove home. I had no idea what he meant, but it felt like a warning, something I couldn't ignore. The next day, I decided to check the restaurant's security footage. What I saw was unsettling. The man wasn't just hanging around the dumpster as I had thought. He was digging through the trash, but not the regular trash. He was specifically after the leftover chicken bones. I watched, unable to look away, as he carefully sifted through the trash bags, pulling out the bones and disappearing into the night. That was it. I had to do something. I couldn't let this weird man keep coming around and disturbing my business. I started locking the dumpster with a heavy-duty padlock every night, thinking that would put an end to it. But I was wrong. The next morning, I walked out to the back of the restaurant and gasped. The padlock was broken, the dumpster overturned, and once again, all the chicken bones were gone. I couldn't understand it. What was he doing with them? Why was he so obsessed with the bones? Furious, I decided to take matters into my own hands. That night, I gathered up the leftover bones and decided to burn them. We had a small incinerator behind the restaurant for packaging, and I figured that would be the end of it. I tossed the bag of bones inside, turned on the flame, and watched as they burned to ash. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, like I had finally outsmarted the man. But when I returned to the restaurant the next morning, everything had changed. The back door of the restaurant had been smashed open. Grease from the deep fryer was splattered across the kitchen floor, and there, in the center of it all, were words written on the wall in thick red substance. "You can't stop the offering." My stomach twisted. What was going on? Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, grinning that sickening grin again. Before I could react, he lunged at me. I could feel his hands on my throat strangling me as his breath came in ragged gasps. We struggled, knocking over pots and trays. I could smell the burning grease in the air, and every blow felt like it could be my last. But I fought back, hitting him with everything I had. The pain from the hot oil that splashed on my arm was nothing compared to the terror in my chest. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police arrived just in time to pull the man off me. He didn't resist, just stood there muttering about the bones, about the offering. The police took him away. His name was Edgar, and as they learned, he had a history of mental illness. He was arrested for the vandalism, assault, and his bizarre obsession with the bones. But what really unsettled me was the way he screamed during the struggle. "You can't stop it," he cried. "I need the bones. They grant immortality. You're ruining everything." The weeks that followed were a blur. Edgar was sent for psychiatric evaluation, and my restaurant slowly returned to normal. But I couldn't forget the look in his eyes, the madness in his voice. I realized then that this wasn't some supernatural force at play. It was just a man, lost in his delusions, driven by something dark and twisted. And though I survived that night, I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of fear. Fear that Edgar's obsession with the bones would never truly end. As I sit here now telling you this story, I can only hope that the worst is behind me. But deep down, I know that there's always the chance he might return. And next time, I might not be so lucky. My name is Rachel, and I was just 21 when I started working at the local diner in our small town, Riverbend. It wasn't anything special, just your typical greasy spoon where people came for a warm meal and a friendly chat. I had just moved out of my parents' house, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and this job seemed like a good way to make a living while I worked out my next steps. The morning had started off like any other. I arrived at work early, ready to start my shift and serve the regular crowd. The sun was shining through the windows and the smells of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. I was used to the routine by now: greet the customers, take their orders, and make small talk while I served their food. But today was different. As I worked, a strange feeling began to settle in the pit of my stomach. A sense of unease I couldn't quite shake. I shook my head, brushing it off as nerves. I had just moved out after all. Maybe I was just adjusting to my new life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It started when he walked in. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong here in this quiet small-town diner. His clothes were old and ragged, stained with something dark and thick. He was holding a dead chicken by its neck, the lifeless bird swinging from his hand like it was just another piece of luggage. I stared at him for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was this some kind of joke? He stumbled up to the counter, his eyes darting around as if searching for something. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his lips were cracked from lack of moisture. When he looked at me, I felt my heart race. There was something wrong with him, something deep in his eyes that made me want to run. "Can you make me some chicken burgers?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "6 burgers, I need them made with this chicken. Only this one." I tried to hide my shock, my voice trembling as I replied, "Sir, we can't use that chicken. We have fresh meat for the burgers." His eyes snapped at me, wide and frantic. "No, I need this chicken, this one. It's mine." His voice rose in desperation. My stomach turned, but I nodded, trying to calm him down. "Okay, I'll take care of it," I said, as I gently took the dead chicken from his hands. I carried it to the back, throwing it into the trash. The whole time I could feel his eyes following me, never blinking. The next few days went by and life at the diner returned to normal. That was until he came back. It was the same strange man, only this time he wasn't holding a dead chicken. He was covered in blood, his clothes stained and sticking to his skin. He didn't say anything at first, just sat at one of the booths, staring into space. But I noticed he was mumbling to himself. "5 burgers," he muttered under his breath. "I need 5 chicken burgers." I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't right. I approached him cautiously, my voice low. "Sir, are you okay?" He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. His eyes were wild, like he wasn't fully in control of himself. "I need 5 burgers," he repeated. "Just 5, nothing else." I nodded quickly, not wanting to upset him. "Sure, I'll get them for you." As I walked back to the kitchen to prepare his order, I couldn't stop thinking about the strange way he was acting. It was like he was living in another world, talking to himself, disconnected from reality. After I handed him the burgers, he left the diner without a word. But he didn't go far. I saw him walking down the street, muttering to himself once again. Over the next 2 weeks, he came back to the diner almost every day. Each time he ordered fewer burgers, 4, then 3, and then finally 2. Each time, he was covered in blood, his eyes more distant, more wild. I started to feel a deep sense of dread every time he walked through the door. What was going on? What was he doing with all the chicken? One evening, after his 3rd visit that week, I decided to follow him. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I asked my co-worker, Ben, to cover for me while I stepped out. My heart pounded as I trailed behind him at a safe distance, hoping he wouldn't notice me. He walked through the streets muttering to himself, not seeming to care who saw him. He led me to an old, run-down church at the edge of town. I stopped in my tracks when I saw the door creak open. He walked right in, still mumbling. Something about the whole scene sent shivers down my spine. I waited outside for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath. I was just about to leave when an older man walked by. He had a kind face, but his eyes seemed weary, like someone who had seen too much. "Excuse me?" I called, stepping toward him. "Do you know that man who just went into the church?" The man paused and looked at me with a sad smile. "Ah, Christopher. Poor soul. He's been around here for years. Used to be a successful farmer. But after his wife died, he lost his mind. I was stunned. What happened to his wife? The guard sighed. No one really knows. She was found dead in their barn one night. Some say it was a stroke. Others say she had an accident with one of the animals. But whatever happened, it broke Christopher. He became obsessed with the idea that he needed to bring his wife back. My heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. What do you mean? After she died, Christopher started hearing voices. Thought his wife was speaking to him, telling him to do terrible things. He would go into town, feeding his dead wife's body to his chickens, then coming here to the church for some kind of ritual. I felt sick. This man was insane, driven by grief and madness. I didn't know what to think, but something told me I had to find out more. The next day, the police stormed the old farmhouse, and what they found made headlines all across town. Christopher had indeed been feeding his daughters to the chickens. He had kept them locked in the barn, starving, and had been secretly feeding them to his hens. When the police found them, his 3 eldest daughters, Cynthia, Rachel, and Pauline, were dead, buried beneath the floorboards of the barn. The worst part? Christopher wasn't finished. He had been preparing for the 4th daughter, the youngest, and had planned to bring her into the madness. He thought if he could sacrifice all of them, his wife would return. The police arrested Christopher, but the horror didn't end there. As they dug deeper into his past, they discovered he had been keeping the whole town in the dark. Everyone had thought he was just a grieving husband, but no one knew the full extent of his delusions. The town was never the same after that. Christopher was locked away in a mental institution, but the damage had already been done. The church where he had gone to pray, where he had heard the voices, was abandoned. The barn was burned to the ground, and the memories of those poor girls haunted the streets. I never went back to the diner. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the strange man with the blood-stained clothes and the dead chicken. I couldn't stop thinking about the things he had done, the horrors he had unleashed. Sometimes when I drive past that church, I still wonder if Christopher's voice echoes through the walls, calling out to his dead wife, asking for one more sacrifice. The town of Riverbend will never forget what happened there, and neither will I.